It is time to reimagine leadership. My name is Ben Owden, and I would like to welcome you to a series of conversations in partnership with WomenLift Health around how can we develop new approaches to the new challenges that leaders face in the 21st century. Greetings to you. I hope you are at peace and are having a meaningful and productive day. Welcome to another episode of the Why Lead podcast. I'm your host, Ben Owden. In partnership with WomenLift Health, we're having a series of conversations on how to reimagine leadership. As we all know, the world is evolving. There are new challenges that most workplaces are facing. And so what are the new approaches that we can take when it comes to leadership, and particularly leadership in healthcare? And today, in conversation, we will be exploring actionable steps to help advance women leadership in healthcare. Now, my guest today, I recently came across a statement that she said, and it made me stop and think. She said, Africa is being run by women. We're just not acknowledging it. And what a statement. What a thought. Now, while many hold probably a similar sentiment, very few are actually working towards realizing that, or at least opening everyone else's eyes to that reality. But that cannot be said about our guest for today. She has more than 20 years of experience in healthcare, including several senior roles in delivery and financing of healthcare. She has held senior leadership roles regionally at Philips, ARC, and PATH, leading the global campaign for micro bicides. She is currently the executive director of FP2030, the only global organization focusing solely on family planning. She is a certified physician coach and spends most of her time coaching doctors to lead for better healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Samu Dube. Dr. Samu, karibu.
Karibuni sana, Ben.
So being someone who, I think you have a very interesting background. Sometimes when I was looking through your background, I was like, where did she get the time to do all of this? But being a practitioner, being someone who leads organizations, but also being someone who coaches. What are some of the things in your experience, especially coaching leaders, that you've seen that these are a set of decisions or changes that when leaders make them, they move from being ordinary to being extraordinary?
I think maybe it's when you talk extraordinary, it's recognizing that innate ability that we all have to be extraordinary. And nurturing that, for me, is a good starting point for every individual, because we often don't realize it, right? The environments that we grow up under, the social conditioning that we all go through tells us that we need to behave and be in our place and know our place and space so that we are ordinary, right? But yet there is inherently in all of us that innate ability to become extraordinary. And when you are a coach, it's about bringing that up to say, if today there is a magazine that's written about me, what is it saying? And then reflecting on that and saying, if I'm walking into a library like tomorrow, and there is this headline, what do I want it to say? And that reimagination is that difference between ordinary and extraordinary. And extraordinary, by the way, Ben, doesn't happen overnight. Extraordinary is also about being intentional and saying, I started, as an obstetrician like this, but now that I am here, how do I become extraordinary? I am an ordinary cardiologist. How do I become an extraordinary one? It's that intentionality that we build in coaching, build in leading organizations, that I build in conversations that I have with everybody so that they can realize how they become extraordinary. And, it started with the phrase like Africa is being run by women and we just are not recognizing it. You know why I say that? It's because leadership is not just about position. It's about responsibility. So who is making those decisions and who is implementing them? We are like running these economies. We just are not in those roles yet. But we are responsible for many decisions that are actually making Africa tick. And if only we could recognize that, we could actually just spur the next level of growth for the continent, the next level of architecture of the Africa we want.
And I think in your story, I think you referenced your grandmother
Yes.
as an inspirational piece to your story. And so I'm sure when you were younger, probably that extraordinary piece of it, she had a lot of influence around that. But as you started to have success, because I love what you said there, sometimes that this leap from ordinary to extraordinary is a never-ending loop.
Yes.
Meaning you might be extraordinary where you are right now, but as you continue to evolve and advance, you will enter a state of ordinary and then you have to take another leap, right?
Exactly.
And so when you started having that level of success in your own career, what is it, I guess, in you that always pushed you to say, I will not settle with the success that I'm having right now. I will always go for another one, right? I think you're a doctor, but then you studied finance. So what is it in you, I guess, that always gives you the hunger to say, I will not settle where I am. I will go for another mountain?
I think for me, it's being uncomfortable with being comfortable. Because comfort is human nature. It's like we all are wired towards comfort, right? And then when we attain it, either you settle for being comfortable and you say, yeah, now I've achieved. Or you just start becoming uncomfortable about this comfort, this level of comfort, in a world where there is scarcity, in a world where there is need, in a world where things could be better, in a world where, around you, that there could be some leadership surge that, because leadership, Ben, I believe, is just imagining a future that doesn't exist yet. And that future exists in every sphere, in your family, there could be things that could be better. And that for me is leadership. And then being uncomfortable with being comfortable is what spurs me. And how do I create that? I think it's just those moments of pausing and reflecting, those moments of thinking fast and then slow, those moments where I slow think my own journey and start to reimagine things that are around me, so that when you do that better, you know that you actually can achieve until we die. And what I always admire is people who say, when I am going down in my grave where there's nothing to do, I want to die empty, having given all that is in me. And within me is that innate ability to be extraordinary.
Wow. Beautifully said. I've heard a lot of people say, and advocating for this idea of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. But I don't think I've ever heard someone say being uncomfortable with comfort, because for many people, comfort is the goal. But you say, no, I don't want to find that comforting. I always want to be uncomfortable. And I think you've put it so well there, right? Being the ultimate goal being to do everything that was possible while you had your time here. Wow, beautifully said. Now, there's a published work by a behavioral economist called Matthias Zutter, right? Where he talks about just different studies that have been done around the workplaces and leadership and women and diversity and a lot of other things. And then in one study that he highlights, he talks about this story, which is very interesting. A woman goes for an interview, and she walks into a room, and in that room, there are 4 men, and there's 1 woman, right? So ideally, you would think that would increase her chances because at least there's another woman in the room. But in their studies, they found that it actually works to the disadvantage of the interviewee, because the woman in the room feels this sense of pressure to be extremely critical. Because if you're not, then there's that microaggression from the men in the room that, are you being, because she's your fellow woman? So when we talk about diversity and leadership, and I think sometimes our idea of diversity can be so superficial. We settle for basically tokenism, right? We have one in the room, so that's okay. But then they're not really given the space to truly thrive and be there. So I guess what should organizations do, and people who have those positions of leadership, especially men, to create that safe space where, for the women who are advancing, they can have all the tools in the right context to truly thrive.
We are talking, Ben, here about the dearth of agency for this particular woman who was in the interviewing room and as the only female panelist in that particular room. She lacked the agency to make a decision that, and going back to my point around being uncomfortable with comfort, is like, why do we celebrate things like, I went there, I was the only Black woman. I went there, I was the only woman. I went there, I was the only. Why are you comfortable about being the only? And actually, at times, you need to be ashamed to even say, for years, I was the only. Why are you the only one? Why are you not? Why do you get to the top and kick off the ladder? It's because you've got that depth of agency and trust that you inherently can change things. And I think we should start with that, with the individual, that, if we really want to create change and we really want to advance diversity, the people who get there first need to grow an agency to say, I actually am the agent who is going to initiate change and a wave. You need at times that one person who breaks a glass ceiling or breaks a barrier or whatever wall. And then when that becomes the norm, many more could come in. So I understand pretty well, in that behavioral economics story that we feel, what are they going to say? Because we don't have that agency and confidence to say, now that I'm the only Black woman here, I need to bring in more so that there are many of us, because you don't feel you've got that agency. And that's something that we need to tackle in the journeys to leadership. You heard yesterday Helen Clark, who was talking about how some of this is a systematic issue. In the interview, there is one woman, but what do policies say? We say in the interviewing panel, we should actually be clear and deliberate around getting more people who we want to see in leadership positions. In the policy, we need to make it clear. Then in the work environment, we need to make it easier also to attract the people who we want to attract. But if all else fails, what do we do, Ben? We should create a quota. At times, many things are going to fail, but then let's create a quota. If that woman doesn't have the agency to bring in more women, maybe our policies in the workplace need to say at least 25%. We start with whatever we need to do for us to get there. Because we know the science of leadership, right? It's saying that when there is diversity, in the tapestry of diversity, there is strength.
Yes.
And we are failing ourselves in many places, even in nations, Ben. Because when you talk about nation building is about embracing a tribe that is different from yours. It's about embracing people who don't look like you, for you to build that tapestry that becomes rich in running something that is called a nation. Because you can't just lead in a homogeneous way and you're saying you're running a nation in a nation like Kenya, like Tanzania. You've got people from different backgrounds, people from different tribes who need to come and form a government. And it's difficult. And similarly, in an organization, you need people who don't think just like you for you to be successful as an organization. So we need that call around systems, around individuals, their autonomy and agency to bring in people who may look like them or are different from them.
Wow, beautifully said. I think I particularly love the idea, because I think sometimes there's a lot of pride in being the only, right? I'm the only one here. But I love what you said there, meaning do not be comfortable with being the only.
Yeah.
It's not about you. And if you happen to be the only, then maybe see yourself as the person responsible for opening the door for others to come in. There's one of my friends, he said this, he said, pride in leadership is basically delegating my way out of my position, meaning that when I'm unnecessary in an organization, I've done a good job as a leader. When I become unnecessary, when I become irrelevant, because I've done, but as long as I am relevant, I am needed, I am required, then maybe I haven't done a great job as a leader as well, right? And that changes your mind from just it being about you and you being really an agent for everyone else's growth and progress and ascension. Yeah.
And maybe in there, Ben, it's not as easy. It's easier said than done,
of
right?
course, yeah.
To say, the leader is like, what happens in the room when I'm not there? If the institution can continue, that's good. yet when you start, there are people who are like, oh, we'll see what she's going to do. No, I haven't been, you get into meetings where even some of your team members, they already have a pen ready to write what you're going to say. And I'm like, no, I'm expecting you at your level to actually start contributing. And my role here is to guide you. But it takes a leap of trust and faith in your staff, in your team to actually run with it so that they can run when you are not there. It's a journey on its own that we can talk about some other day.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And so as we're wrapping up the conversation, my last question to you is a question that we ask all of our guests, right? It's the 111. What is the one book that you read at some point that you say, if I had a time machine, I would go back and read this book earlier in my life? And what is the one habit that you started practicing at some point that you say, I wish I had started earlier as well? And what is the one personal value that you will not compromise no matter the cost?
Interesting, because there are so many books, and books often I put them also as mentors. They become mentors in your journey, especially when you're trying to trailblaze areas that you're not familiar with, or you don't have any other mentors. I follow Brené Brown's work, and she reminded
great
me,
author,
yes, great author. She's actually great, and like when you're talking about leadership and leading, being brave in leadership, like leading brave and leading when you're afraid. She talks about how lead anyway. At times you don't feel like it, lead anyway. At times you don't feel you are equipped, and show up anyway. So I think for me is daring greatly.
Daring greatly.
Daring greatly. That's the one which is about how do you dare. And she starts one of her TED Talks talking about the men in the arena. I don't know whether you listen to that. And I went to read that over and over again to say, you are going to be in the spotlight. You are going to be playing, right? You are the one who is going to be injured, but wake up and fight again. But the one who dares greatly is the person who actually, that person who is in the arena is the person who actually would dream about something that is bigger than themselves. So Brené Brown, I really follow most of her work closely. But if I were the younger version of myself, I wanted to be bolder. I wish I was even more bold. In my younger self. And Sheryl Sandberg, and when she talks about leaning in, that actually created a revolution, right? How do you lean in the way you do things, in the way you posture your head, heart, and mind? How do you lean in places that matter? How do you lean in and be heard? Because there was a need to move women, especially, to a place where if you're not at the table, you are part of the menu. If you are bringing nothing on the table, you are actually basically non-existent. And I think that is one other leadership book that for me really changed the way I actually think. And lastly, also in honor of Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. I actually read that book. It's thick and it's huge.
It's huge.
But I read it because he touches on behavioral economics in an interesting way. He touches on why as leaders, you will need to make decisions that are fast, but you need to slow think some things. So I've given my time, my life, in terms of leadership, a space and opportunity to think things slowly. Even within a pressure where the team is like, oh, we need a decision fast. I'm like, let's slow think this, because there are implications that may be beyond the organization when we are doing this. So dare greatly, lead bravely and be bold. Lean in and think fast and slow.
And then what's the one habit?
I am somewhat a 5 a.m. person.
The 5 a.m. club.
Yes. There are all these other habits around the club, but I exercise a lot, try to have my quiet time in the morning so that I can really order my day. So that's one thing that I really do. But I've got an interesting habit. My daughter is in the UK, and I sort of light up when I talk to my daughter because she just reminds me of my younger self who wasn't as bold. She is bold. And that's a moment that I take, when I call my daughter, I really treasure that moment. So that's another habit. We call each other daily and we do talk a lot. So she is really the apple of my eye.
Connecting with your loved one.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
And then the last one is the personal value that you will not compromise no matter the cost?
I think each and every day, is living for something that is bigger than myself. Just knowing that it's not about me. And that there is that one day where I'll be almost called to order, called to account. I am a Christian and I believe that, you know what, there is something that is even beyond this life that we should live on earth. So I live with that posterity mindset that I should live for something bigger than myself. And one day I'm going to be called to account. So that's what I believe, Ben.
Wow. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Samu, for this conversation. You've given me a lot to think about and to reflect on. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
And to our dear listener and those who are watching, this has been the WomenLift podcast, and I'm your host, Ben Owden.